Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. And today we're going to talk about the Jedi Knights and the Light Saber. Are you fans of the Star Wars series? Well, I certainly am. I have watched all the films, the old ones and the new ones, of course, and I've also played quite a lot of video games based on this popular series. Just for instance, to mention one, Knights of the Old Republic, and so forth. Now, of course, we're dealing with fiction here, but I've noticed quite a few other historical YouTubers have talked about this topic, so I decided to bring my own opinions to the table. For example, other YouTubers who have talked about this are Scalagrim, Scholar Gladiatoria, of course. Lindeberg, I think he talked about the Jedis being sexy or something like that. I don't 100% recall, but I remember there was a hilarious videos. Oh, and also Thrand talked about the lightsaber, the laser saber, and all these other things in the Jedis. As a matter of fact, I want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to Thrand's channel. Now, I can't really pronounce his name's channel. I think it's like Theng, Thrand, I don't know. Anyways, Thang and Elgrim, they're really cool. Please go check them out. They're very, very nice. They make very interesting content, and they're very, very American. And I mean that in a positive way, of course. Alright, so what does the Metatron have to bring to the table as far as this topic is concerned? Well, first of all, I reckon that the reason why I like this series is because of this idyllic concept and idea of the Jedi Knights and the Sith Lords. You know, these warriors who deliberately choose the path of the sword and in a futuristic and technologically advanced society, and use their high training skills and equanimity to overpower their enemies in combat. I mean, it sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But the thing is that I think in this video I'd like to mention a few things, a few subtopics. So first of all, I'd like to examine their fighting style, which one cannot help but notice that changed throughout the entire series, from the old videos to the new remake ones and prequels, etc. So we will be dealing with the fighting style. We will be talking about the actual weapon that they use, the lightsaber, and then perhaps a little bit more generically speaking about the concept of the Jedi Knight, whether it is actually correct to call him and address him as a knight, so to speak. Alright, so first things first, let's begin from the fighting style. So as I said, that the combat and the way the Jedi use these light swords, these plasma or laser powered implements of war, changes throughout the entire saga. Now, I'm a little bit, I don't mean to be fastidious or anything, but I'm a little bit annoyed by this. Why? Not because of the very concept of, Jedis in their prime form evolving into a more elaborate fighting style, but because of the reasons behind it, behind these changes. Now, first of all, if we look at the old films, what we see is a heavily Japanese-based combat. I mean, if you look at the way they use the sword, it's basically kenjutsu. And to be honest, if you ask me, it's just my opinion, I think it's based on Katori Shinto-ryu as far as the style of kenjutsu is concerned. Now, I don't mean that the way they fight is 100% coherent within kenjutsu rules. Of course, it's not. Occasionally, you do find pirouettes. I think in one of the old films, Obi-Wan Kenobi actually does perform a twisting pirouette and that kind of stuff that we know that were not actually used in real historical combat. So it's very Japanese and actually very realistic. And the reason for that is that Lucas was paying homage to kenjutsu. Again, I say kenjutsu and I don't say kendo or yaido on purpose. I don't think that there is any kendo or any yaido in the style they use. It's just pure kenjutsu. Just my opinion, if you will, but that's what I think. Now, as we move to the prequels, we see a lot of wushu kung fu, or wushu, if you want to use Chinese pitches and tones. And the reason for that, I think, again, is it wouldn't really make sense that style changed from Chinese to Japanese as a sort of evolution. It's kind of strange. I mean, they're just culturally different approaches to weapon use. It's quite clear that the reason why there was this big change is because we need to keep in mind that the whole prequels and new films came out, roughly speaking, at the same time as The Matrix, Crouching Tiger, and Hidden Dragon. So a lot of kung fu was the norm at the time. It was what people wanted to see, and this is is why things changed to that and more fantasy-like choreographic styles, which as far as I'm concerned is kind of a shame. Again, as far as the old films are concerned though, there are some occasions where we don't really see Kenjutsu, but we do see some modern saber fighting. For example, the duel between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. Spoiler alert, the part where he actually loses his hand, although kind of spoiler alert. I don't know how many decades have passed, I can't really call it a spoiler alert anyway, but just trying to be polite. That fight there, the way he uses the sword one-handed sometimes, I think is clearly influenced by Bob Anderson, who was the choreographer as far as the sword combat was concerned for that specific fight. And as a matter of fact, he's an Olympic saber practitioner, so we can see that there is a little bit of kind of modern European fighting style there, with the addition of a Hema-looking character using what seems to be a kind of a light, long sword, and that looks cool. It looks very nice. I'm very happy with that. But the reason why I don't like this kind of thing is that because it followed a trend or fads, if you will. I would have wanted something more realistic, like an evolution and change, but towards effectiveness and efficacy rather than from efficacy to pirouettes and stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, if you really wanted to have both the Chinese and the Japanese way of fighting and a little bit of Hema, you could have diversified perhaps Jedi schools, within the lore. We could have had, like, in a certain area of the galaxy, people fight like the Chinese do, and in another area they fight like the Japanese, and in another one they fight like Hema, and that's why they have Quillans, because that's the kind of way their own specific cultural approach to lightsaber combat. I would find this much more interesting, but then again, that's just me. As far as the actual plasma swords are concerned, laser lightsabers, I do have a lot of things to say, so let's try to keep them as short as possible. I'll try to be concise. Well, first of all, I think the first thing that really is interesting is the way they don't go through each other when they fight. The swords seem to kind of stick. So why is that? We have a coherent beam of energy projected by an emitter, which goes through a whole series of field energizers which further stabilize it and sort of encase it inside a field, which kind of denotes the boundaries of this plasma beam. Now, as much as these boundaries contain the plasma inside, they also make sure that no other plasma can go through it, and this would explain why the two sabers colliding against each other, they don't actually go through. Now, of course, the first question that comes to mind is then, if the plasma energy beam is kind of contained, then how can it cut through things? Well, the only thing that comes to my mind is the idea of having these energizers and energizing fields that contain only the plasma, but they cannot contain normal matter. So the matter goes through it and it's cut. As a matter of fact, I think within the lore of Star Wars, there are certain types of material, which I don't recall the names of at the moment, but that can actually resist plasma. So, it's interesting, and I think it can make sense. Now, what this leads into is not only the functionality of the weapon, but also the fact that the weapons seem to stop and stick. This is interesting because it could explain why laser blades don't have quillons, they don't have guards. Because I don't think that they slide. I mean, it's not metal, we're not talking about steel. So whenever they collide, whenever you have a bind, I notice that they seem to stick as if they were biting into each other. And this makes sense even from a historical point of view. If you think about it, a sword's edge that comes into contact with a sword's flat will slide, but if you have two sharp swords edges colliding, they will bite into each other, and so you're not going to have the sliding motion. So probably the reason why they haven't developed guards, exception being Ren's sword, is because laser blades, they don't slide because they're not made of metal. They stick because of the field around them, which encases them, which would also explain the strange sound that they emit when they hit each other. So, having said all this, what would my opinion be on a plasma guard? Well, probably its functionality is completely different from real historical guard and cross guard, because again, this is made so that when the blades slide, if they happen to do so, your hand will be protected. So probably in that case is supposed to protect you, but in a different way. So not considering sliding in mind, but considering people just trying to strike towards your hand. That's the only way I can imagine it. And this leads to the question, are Jedis actually knights? Well, again, in the first one, I think they look a lot more, the weapons that they use, and the style of combat that they have looks more Japanese. So I would call them Jedi Samurai, although I have to say that Jedi Knight sounds a lot better. Except for being Ren. Considering the weapon he has, he could be a knight, a Jedi Knight. Again, this is perhaps technicality, but the whole honor code and stuff, I think it's very similar and resemblant of both the samurai and the knight. One last thing I'd like to say, it has to do with their combat style. Now, what would happen if a modern sword master had to take a Light Saber and try to use it? Well, in my opinion, I think he would hurt himself. The reason for that is because, as Scalagrim has eloquently pointed out in this video, most likely a blade made of plasma or laser or light or whatever that is probably will not have a mass, hence it will not actually weight anything. So it would be like using this sword, but only having the handle. Now, what this means is that a person who has trained his whole life having a weapon which has weight will be used to that. So his muscle, the way our muscles respond, are used to a certain weight. As a matter of fact, have you ever tried training with a heavier weapon? And when you actually pick up the real weapon, you will move a lot faster. That is because your muscles have got used to responding to a certain weight. Hence, you will be faster. Or, for example, imagine practicing punching with weights in your hands, and then again, you remove the weights and your punch are faster. Have you ever tried jumping on one of these? You jump on there for like half an hour. When you stop jumping and you try to jump on the normal ground, your legs will be ridiculously stiff, and you won't be able to jump as if you weighted a ton. Now, this is all the same concept, is because you get used to a certain weight and your muscles respond accordingly. So with a lightsaber, most likely we would be wielding it as if it had mass, and not having it, we would probably not be able to control it. Now, the final question is then, what about a person who has trained his whole life with a lightsaber? Well, if I were to be a trainer, a master in a Jedi school, I would probably have my pupils first train with handles, with nothing. No blade, nothing. So they train with that. After a few years, they kind of mastered that. I would add something here which would still have no weight, like paper or something like that, which would have some kind of paint. So if they hit themselves, they would have like some kind of color to witness that. And then after a few years of training like that, I would give them a laser blade, and in that case I think they could fight effectively, and they would not hurt themselves just as much as a modern fencer, Hema practitioner, Kenjutsu practitioner can use a real sharp sword without hurting themselves. Alright, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.